Welcome to True Crime Threads, where dark secrets and shocking twists unravel. Today, we dive into the chilling story of a sheriff, a young girl's forbidden romance, and a murder that rocked a small town to its core. In the quiet town of Willow Creek, Sheriff Marcus Hale was a respected figure, a man who seemed to embody the ideals of justice and integrity. With his broad shoulders, neatly trimmed beard, and a voice that carried both authority and warmth, Marcus was the kind of person people turned to in times of trouble. He had served as sheriff for over a decade, earning the trust of the community through his dedication and approachable demeanor. But beneath the polished exterior of the town's protector lay a life teetering on the edge of chaos. At 42, Marcus was trapped in a marriage that had long since lost its spark. His wife, Linda, had grown distant over the years, her once vibrant personality dulled by the monotony of small-town life. The couple rarely spoke, their home filled with an oppressive silence that Marcus tried to escape by throwing himself into his work. It was during this turbulent time that Marcus first noticed Sophie Bennett, a 19-year-old waitress at the Willow Creek diner. Sophie was new to town, having moved from a neighboring county to live with her aunt after a falling out with her parents. She was young, with wide, curious eyes and a smile that seemed to light up the room. To Marcus, she represented everything his life lacked: youth, excitement, and a sense of possibility. Their first encounter was innocent enough. Marcus stopped by the diner for a cup of coffee after a long shift, and Sophie, eager to please, struck up a conversation. She was fascinated by his stories of life as a sheriff, and Marcus found himself drawn to her enthusiasm and innocence. What began as casual small talk soon evolved into something more. Marcus started visiting the diner more frequently, always finding an excuse to linger at the counter where Sophie worked. She, in turn, was flattered by the attention of such a prominent figure in the community. Their interactions grew increasingly personal, with Marcus confiding in Sophie about the struggles in his marriage, and Sophie sharing her dreams of leaving Willow Creek for a bigger city. Before long, their relationship crossed a line. They began meeting in secret, choosing secluded spots outside town where they could be alone. Marcus promised Sophie a future together, painting a picture of a life filled with love and adventure. Sophie, naive and swept up in the romance, believed him. But as weeks turned into months, cracks began to form in their clandestine affair. Marcus's promises of leaving his wife remained unfulfilled, and Sophie grew increasingly frustrated. She started pressing him for answers, demanding that he make a choice. Marcus, torn between his duty to his marriage and his feelings for Sophie, became evasive and distant. Meanwhile, whispers of their relationship began to circulate in the tight-knit community. Small towns have a way of uncovering secrets, and it wasn't long before rumors reached Linda. Though she said nothing to Marcus, the tension in their home grew palpable. For Sophie, the affair was no longer the thrilling escape it had once been. She felt trapped, her dreams of a future with Marcus slipping away. Yet, she couldn't bring herself to walk away, clinging to the hope that he would eventually keep his promises. Marcus, on the other hand, was consumed by guilt and fear. He knew the affair could destroy his career and reputation, but he was equally terrified of losing Sophie. The weight of his double life began to take its toll, and the once confident sheriff found himself increasingly on edge. Unbeknownst to both of them, their ill-fated romance was hurtling toward a tragic conclusion. The perfect facade Marcus had worked so hard to maintain was beginning to crumble, and the consequences would soon ripple through the entire town. In the shadows of Willow Creek, where secrets festered and trust was a fragile commodity, the stage was set for a story of love, betrayal, and ultimately, murder. One crisp autumn evening, Sophie Bennett failed to return home after her shift at the Willow Creek diner. Her aunt, who had grown accustomed to Sophie's punctuality, began to worry as the hours ticked by. By midnight, with no sign of her niece, she called Sophie's friends and co-workers, but no one had seen her. The next morning, Sophie's parents, who lived in the neighboring county, were notified, and a missing person report was filed. The town of Willow Creek, usually a place where nothing out of the ordinary happened, was suddenly gripped by unease. Sheriff Marcus Hale took charge of the investigation, his demeanor calm and professional, as he addressed the growing crowd of concerned townsfolk. He assured everyone that he would do everything in his power to find Sophie, and search parties were quickly organized. Posters with Sophie's smiling face were plastered on every lamppost and storefront, and volunteers combed through the surrounding woods, fields, and abandoned buildings. The community rallied together, united by the shared hope of bringing Sophie home safely. But as days turned into weeks, the initial optimism began to wane. The search parties found no trace of Sophie, and the case grew colder with each passing day. Marcus held regular press conferences, updating the public on the investigation's progress, but his updates grew increasingly vague. He spoke of following leads and pursuing every possible angle, but the lack of concrete information left the townspeople frustrated and anxious. Behind the scenes, the investigation was fraught with tension. Marcus's colleagues noticed that he seemed unusually on edge, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy. He was quick to dismiss certain leads, particularly those that pointed to Sophie's personal life, and he often worked late into the night, poring over case files alone in his office. Some of his deputies began to whisper among themselves, questioning his judgment and wondering if he was hiding something. The rumors about Marcus and Sophie's relationship, which had been circulating quietly before her disappearance, began to resurface with a vengeance. People recalled seeing them together at the diner, their conversations seeming too familiar for a sheriff and a young waitress. Others remembered spotting Marcus's patrol car parked near the woods outside town, a place where Sophie was known to take walks. The whispers grew louder, and soon, even those who had once admired Marcus began to doubt his integrity. Sophie's parents, desperate for answers, pressed Marcus for updates, but his responses were evasive. He assured them that he was doing everything he could, but his words rang hollow. They began to suspect that he knew more than he was letting on, and their frustration turned to anger. They demanded that the state police take over the investigation, but Marcus insisted that he had everything under control. As the weeks dragged on, the town's initial unity began to fracture. Some residents defended Marcus, citing his years of service and dedication to the community. Others, however, grew increasingly suspicious, convinced that he was hiding something. The tension in Willow Creek was palpable, and the once trusted sheriff found himself at the center of a storm of doubt and speculation. Then, 3 months after Sophie's disappearance, a hiker stumbled upon a shallow grave in the woods just outside town. The body was identified as Sophie Bennett, and the town was plunged into mourning. The discovery reignited the investigation, but it also deepened the mystery. Who had killed Sophie? And why? The answers, it seemed, were closer to home than anyone had imagined. Marcus, now under intense scrutiny, continued to lead the investigation, but his every move was watched with suspicion. The townspeople, once united in their search for Sophie, were now divided, their trust in their sheriff shattered. The case that had begun as a missing person investigation was now a murder inquiry, and the truth, when it finally emerged, would shake Willow Creek to its core. Sophie's parents, who had clung to the belief that their daughter might still be alive, were devastated. The town, once united in its search for the missing girl, was now consumed by grief and anger. Sheriff Marcus Hale, who had been at the forefront of the investigation, now found himself under a microscope. The discovery of Sophie's body brought a renewed intensity to the case, and every decision Marcus had made during the investigation was scrutinized. Forensic teams descended on the scene, meticulously collecting evidence in the hopes of piecing together what had happened. It didn't take long for them to make a critical discovery: a silver cufflink, partially buried near the grave. The cufflink bore the initials MH, unmistakably linking it to Marcus. The revelation sent shockwaves through Willow Creek. Marcus was brought in for questioning, his once impeccable reputation now hanging by a thread. He claimed the cufflink had been stolen from his office weeks earlier, but his explanation did little to quell the growing suspicion. His alibi for the night of Sophie's disappearance was shaky. At best, he had told his deputies he was working late at the station, but no one could confirm his whereabouts during the critical hours. As the investigation deepened, more troubling details emerged. Sophie's autopsy revealed that she had been strangled, and the timeline suggested she had been killed shortly after her shift at the diner. Witnesses came forward, recalling seeing Marcus's patrol car near the woods that evening, though he had never mentioned this during the initial investigation. The townspeople, who had once viewed Marcus as a pillar of the community, began to turn against him. Whispers of his affair with Sophie, which had been circulating for months, now took on a sinister tone. Marcus's colleagues, too, began to question his actions. Some recalled how he had been quick to dismiss certain leads, particularly those that pointed to Sophie's personal life. Others remembered his unusual behavior in the weeks following her disappearance, his late nights at the office, his reluctance to involve outside agencies, and his growing irritability. The once respected sheriff was now seen as a man with something to hide. The evidence against Marcus continued to mount. A search of his home revealed a hidden compartment in his desk, containing love letters from Sophie. The letters detailed their affair, with Sophie expressing her frustration over Marcus's refusal to leave his wife. They painted a picture of a relationship that had grown increasingly volatile, with Sophie demanding answers and Marcus becoming more evasive. The letters were a damning piece of evidence, suggesting that Marcus had both motive and opportunity. Despite the mounting pressure, Marcus maintained his innocence. He insisted that he had been framed, that someone was trying to destroy his career and reputation, but his protests fell on deaf ears. The townspeople, once loyal to their sheriff, were now convinced of his guilt. The case had become a media sensation, with reporters descending on Willow Creek to cover the shocking downfall of a once respected lawman. As the investigation neared its conclusion, the question on everyone's mind was not just who had killed Sophie, but why. The answer, when it finally came, would be more shocking than anyone could have imagined. The discovery of the cufflink had set the stage for a dramatic unraveling of secrets, lies, and betrayal, and the truth would leave Willow Creek forever changed. As the investigation into Sophie Bennett's murder deepened, the once respected Sheriff Marcus Hale found himself at the center of a storm of suspicion and betrayal. The discovery of the silver cufflink near Sophie's grave had cast a dark shadow over his reputation, but it was only the beginning of the unraveling. Investigators, determined to uncover the truth, turned their attention to Marcus's personal life, and what they found would shock the town of Willow Creek to its core. A search of Marcus's home revealed a hidden compartment in his desk, a small space that had gone unnoticed during previous searches. Inside, investigators found a stack of love letters, all written by Sophie. The letters detailed their affair in intimate detail, with Sophie pouring out her heart about her feelings for Marcus and her growing frustration over his refusal to leave his wife. She wrote about the promises he had made, promises of a future together, of leaving Linda and starting a new life. But as the letters progressed, the tone shifted from hopeful to desperate. Sophie's words became increasingly urgent, pleading with Marcus to make a decision before it was too late. The letters were a damning piece of evidence, not only confirming the affair but also suggesting a motive. Sophie's frustration had reached a boiling point, and it was clear that she had been pressuring Marcus to choose between her and his wife. For Marcus, the letters were a nightmare come to life. He had tried to keep his double life hidden, but now it was all out in the open, and the consequences were devastating. Linda Hale, Marcus's wife, was the next to come under scrutiny. Initially, she had stood by her husband, publicly defending him against the accusations, but as the evidence mounted, her resolve began to waver. Investigators questioned her repeatedly, and under the pressure, Linda's story started to crack. She admitted that she had known about the affair for months, though she had tried to ignore it, hoping it would blow over. She also revealed that Marcus had become increasingly erratic in the weeks leading up to Sophie's disappearance, often staying out late and returning home in a state of agitation. But the most shocking revelation came when Linda confessed to finding blood-stained clothes in their garage shortly after Sophie went missing. Fearing the worst, she had burned the clothes, hoping to protect her husband and preserve what was left of their marriage. Her admission sent shockwaves through the investigation. The blood-stained clothes could have been a critical piece of evidence, and their destruction raised serious questions about Linda's involvement. Marcus, meanwhile, continued to maintain his innocence. He claimed that the love letters had been taken out of context and that the blood-stained clothes had nothing to do with Sophie's murder. He insisted that he was being framed, but his protests fell on deaf ears. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and the townspeople, once loyal to their sheriff, were now convinced of his guilt. As the case against Marcus grew stronger, the investigation took an unexpected turn. A local mechanic came forward with a security tape from his shop, located near the woods where Sophie's body had been found. The tape, which had been overlooked during the initial investigation, showed a figure resembling Linda Hale driving a car into the woods on the night of Sophie's disappearance. The revelation was a bombshell. The grainy image was enough to raise serious questions, and investigators quickly shifted their focus to Marcus's wife. The discovery of the security tape forced a complete re-examination of the case. Investigators revisited the evidence, paying particular attention to the blood-stained clothes Linda had admitted to burning. Forensic experts determined that the blood on the clothes matched Sophie's, but the timeline didn't align with Marcus's known movements that night. Instead, it pointed to Linda. Under intense questioning, Linda's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Linda, who had initially portrayed herself as a betrayed wife trying to protect her husband, finally broke down and confessed. She revealed that she had discovered Marcus's affair with Sophie months earlier, and had been consumed by a mix of anger and humiliation. On the night of Sophie's disappearance, Linda had confronted her near the woods outside town. The confrontation turned violent, and in a fit of rage, Linda strangled Sophie. Panicked, she buried the body in a shallow grave and returned home, hoping to bury the secret along with it. But Linda's actions didn't end there. Determined to protect herself and punish Marcus for his betrayal, she planted the silver cufflink near the grave to frame him. She had also burned the blood-stained clothes to eliminate any evidence linking her to the crime. Linda's plan had been meticulous, but the security tape had exposed her. Her confession sent shockwaves through the courtroom and the town of Willow Creek. Marcus, who had spent months maintaining his innocence, was exonerated, but his life was in ruins. The affair had cost him his marriage, his career, and the trust of the community he had once served. He resigned as sheriff and left Willow Creek, a broken man haunted by the choices that had led to this tragedy. Linda was sentenced to life in prison, her once quiet life now defined by the crime she had committed. The town, still reeling from the shocking turn of events, struggled to make sense of what had happened. The case had exposed the dark undercurrents of betrayal, jealousy, and violence that had been hidden beneath the surface of their idyllic community. Years later, the story of Sophie Bennett's murder remains a cautionary tale in Willow Creek. The once respected sheriff and the young waitress's ill-fated romance had ended in tragedy, but the final twist, the revelation that Linda had been the killer, left an indelible mark on the town. The case serves as a grim reminder that even in the most peaceful places, darkness can lurk behind the most familiar faces. The memory of Sophie, the betrayal of Marcus, and the shocking actions of Linda continue to haunt Willow Creek, A story of love, lies, and murder that will never be forgotten.